In the unforgiving Arizona desert of 1882, a young woman lay dying beneath a torn canvas tent abandoned by her own blood because paralyzed legs made her worthless. The town walked past her every single day. Merchants, preachers, families, every last one of them turned away. But when a quiet carpenter with ghosts in his eyes stumbled upon her half-dead body, something ancient stirred in his chest, something he thought he'd buried forever. Stay with me until the end and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far Miriam's story travels across this world. The Arizona sun didn't forgive, and it sure as hell didn't forget. It beat down on the scattered collection of wood-frame buildings and canvas tents that folks generously called a town, though town suggested something permanent, something worth staying for. This place was neither. It was a waypoint for the desperate and the displaced, a cluster of structures held together by sand, sweat, and the thin hope that somewhere west life might get better. Miriam Dayne had stopped believing in better. She lay beneath a strip of torn canvas that had once been white but now carried the stains of dust storms, rainfall, and time. The fabric snapped and popped in the hot wind, offering no shade worth mentioning. Flies circled her in lazy, patient loops. They knew what she knew. It was only a matter of time. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. Her dark hair, once carefully braided by her mother's hands, now lay matted and filthy against her skull. But it was her eyes that told the real story, wide, watchful, and utterly alone. Every time boots scuffed past on the hard-packed road, those eyes would flicker toward the sound. Every time hope would kindle. And every time those boots would keep walking. She'd lost count of how many had passed. "Please," she'd whispered 3 days ago, her voice still strong enough to carry. "Please, I just need water." A woman in a yellow bonnet had glanced down, seen the twisted angle of Miriam's legs beneath the threadbare blanket, and quickly looked away. Her husband had pulled her along, murmuring something about the Lord's will and natural order. By the second day, Miriam had stopped whispering. By the third, she'd stopped expecting. The paralysis had come sudden and cruel, a fever 2 years back that had left her body whole, but her legs useless as river stones. For a while, her family had carried the burden. Her father, Ezekiel, had been a circuit preacher moving from settlement to settlement with his wife and 3 daughters. Miriam had been the middle child, the quiet one, the one who read books when her sisters practiced needlework. After the fever, everything changed. "Dead weight," her father had called her one night when he thought she was sleeping. "Can't work, can't walk, can't marry, just another mouth that gives nothing back." Her mother had cried but said nothing. Her sisters had looked at their own legs with new gratitude and new fear. When the family wagon rolled west toward California, Miriam had been left under that canvas with 2 days' worth of bread and a canteen of water. Her father hadn't even looked back. Her mother had once, but the wagon hadn't stopped. That had been 6 days ago. The bread was gone, the canteen was empty, and Miriam Dayne, 23 years old, with a mind sharp as cut glass and a body that refused to obey, was dying in the dirt, while a town full of God-fearing people stepped over her like she was a stone in the road. She didn't cry anymore. Tears were a luxury and she had none left to spend. Instead, she watched the sky. It was a hard, pale blue, the color of something beautiful that didn't care whether you saw it or not. A hawk circled high above, riding thermals, with wings that barely moved. Miriam wondered what it would be like to move like that. Effortless, free. She wondered if dying felt the same way. The sun climbed higher, the heat pressed down like a hand on her chest. Somewhere in the town, a blacksmith's hammer rang against an anvil, steady, rhythmic, indifferent. Life went on. It always did for those still living. Miriam closed her eyes. She didn't hear the wagon at first. It was the creak of wood and the low groan of axles that pulled her back from the edge of sleep. Or maybe it was something deeper than sleep. She forced her eyes open, squinting against the glare. The wagon was small, practical, pulled by a single mule that looked as tired as she felt. and walking alongside it, reins loose in one calloused hand, was a man. He was tall, lean, in the way men get when they work hard and eat little. His shirt was faded blue, rolled to the elbows. His hat was brown and shapeless, pulled low against the sun. A beard covered the lower half of his face, not wild but not carefully tended either, and his eyes. Even from a distance, Miriam could see they were the color of winter rivers. Cold, clear, careful. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the road ahead, his face set in the expression of a man who'd learned long ago that the world didn't reward attention. Miriam's breath caught. This was it. This was the last chance. She tried to speak, but her throat was too dry, her tongue too swollen. The sound that came out was barely a rasp, a broken animal noise that didn't carry past the canvas edge. The man kept walking. Desperation flared hot in Miriam's chest. She lifted one trembling hand, the only part of her that still obeyed, and let it fall against a tin cup beside her. The clang was sharp, sudden, bright. The man stopped. For a long, terrible moment he stood frozen, then slowly he turned his head. His eyes found her. Miriam couldn't read his expression. There was no pity there, no disgust, just a kind of weighing like he was measuring something invisible. He glanced down the road, then back at her. She saw his jaw tighten beneath the beard. Then he tied the mule to a post and walked toward her. Each step crunched in the gravel. Each step brought him closer. Miriam's heart hammered so hard she thought it might crack a rib. Up close, she could see the scars on his hands. Old burns that had healed, crooked, the marks of a man who worked with wood and iron and things that bit back. He crouched beside her, and the shadow of his body fell across her face like mercy. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was low, rough-edged, but not unkind. "You hurt?" It was such a simple question, such an absurd question. Miriam laughed, a dry, cracked sound that hurt her chest. "No," she whispered. "I'm dying." The man's eyes narrowed. He reached out slowly, carefully, and touched the back of his hand to her forehead. His skin was rough and warm. She felt the fever in her own body reflected back. "How long you been here?" he asked. 6 days. Her voice was barely a thread. "Maybe 7. I stopped counting." His expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. He looked at the empty canteen, the discarded crust of molded bread, the blanket that barely covered her twisted legs. Then he looked back toward the town, toward the people walking, talking, living their lives, within shouting distance of a dying woman. "They know you're here?" he asked. "Yes. And they just—" He stopped himself, jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle jump. He exhaled hard through his nose and stood. "Don't move." Miriam almost laughed again, as if she had a choice. He walked back to his wagon and began pulling things out, tools mostly. A hammer, a saw, lengths of rope. Then he moved to a nearby fence, old and half-rotted, and began prying rails free with a crowbar. The wood groaned and snapped. Within minutes he'd laid 2 long rails on the ground and was lashing crosspieces between them with quick, practiced knots. He was building something. Miriam watched, unable to look away. The man worked in silence, his movements efficient and sure. No wasted motion, no hesitation. When the frame was done, he pulled a piece of canvas from his wagon and stretched it tight between the rails, securing it with more rope. A stretcher. He'd built her a stretcher. "All right," he said, returning to her side. "This is gonna hurt, but I'll be as gentle as I can." "Why?" The words slipped out before Miriam could stop it. "Why are you doing this?" The man paused. For the first time, something human flickered across his face. Something tired and sad and old. "Because nobody else is," he said simply. He slid one arm beneath her shoulders, the other beneath her knees. She felt the strength in him, coiled and careful. "On 3, he murmured. 1, 2. On 3 he lifted her. Pain screamed up Miriam's spine. Her vision went white, then black, then white again. She felt herself being lowered onto the canvas, felt the rough fabric against her back. The world spun. Nausea rolled through her gut. But then the spinning stopped. The pain ebbed to a dull, familiar ache, and when she opened her eyes, she saw the man's face above her watching, with an expression that might have been concern. "You still with me?" he asked. Miriam nodded, not trusting her voice. "Good, we're going home." He lifted the stretcher with both hands and began walking. The town slid past on either side: the general store, the saloon, the little whitewashed church where her father used to preach. A few people stopped to stare. A woman with a basket whispered something to her companion. A man in a suit shook his head and turned away. Not one of them said a word. The carpenter Miriam didn't even know his name, yet carried her past all of them without breaking stride. His face was stone, his eyes were fixed ahead, and in that moment Miriam understood something fundamental about him. He'd stopped caring what people thought a long time ago. They left the town behind. The road stretched into open scrubland dotted with sage and Joshua trees. The sun hammered down. The stretcher swayed with each step, but the man's grip never faltered. Miriam watched his face, looking for signs of strain, but found none. Just that same quiet determination, like he'd decided something and nothing on earth would change his mind. After what felt like hours, a structure appeared on the horizon, a low building made of weathered wood surrounded by stacks of lumber and half-finished projects. A workshop. Beside it stood a small house, simple and square, with a porch just wide enough for a chair. Home. The man carried her to the house and shouldered the door open. The interior was dim and cool, smelling of cedar and dust. He laid the stretcher on a narrow cot against one wall, then stood back, breathing hard for the first time. "I'll get you water," he said. He disappeared into another room. Miriam heard the clank of a pump, the splash of water into a cup. When he returned, he lifted her head with one hand and brought the cup to her lips with the other. "Was slow," he cautioned. "Slow, or you'll be sick." The water was cold and clean and tasted like resurrection. Miriam drank in tiny sips, feeling it slide down her ruined throat, feeling her body wake up cell by cell. When the cup was empty, the man refilled it. She drank again and again. Finally, she fell back against the thin pillow, exhausted. "Thank you," she whispered. The man just nodded. He set the cup on a small table, then pulled a blanket from a trunk and draped it carefully over her legs. The gesture was so simple, so ordinary, and yet it broke something inside her. Miriam turned her face away and cried. She cried for the family that had abandoned her, for the town that had let her die, for the life she'd lost, and the body that had betrayed her. She cried silently, shoulders shaking, tears streaming hot and fast. The man didn't try to stop her. He didn't offer empty comfort or awkward words. He just stood there still and solid until the storm passed. When Miriam finally looked back, he was gone. She heard him moving in the other room, the scrape of a pot, the hiss of fire catching kindling. Cooking, he was cooking. She stared at the ceiling, at the rough beams, and the gaps where sunlight slanted through. This wasn't mercy, she thought. Mercy was soft and pitying and condescending. This was something else, something harder and truer. This was respect. Half an hour later, the man returned with a bowl of beans and a spoon. He sat on a stool beside the cot and held the bowl in his lap. "Can you sit up?" he asked. "I think so." He helped her, one arm behind her shoulders, lifting slow and steady until she was propped against the wall. Then he handed her the spoon. Miriam stared at it. "You're not going to feed me?" she asked quietly. The man shook his head. "You got hands. You can feed yourself." It was the most dignifying thing anyone had said to her in 2 years. Miriam took the spoon and ate. The beans were plain, unseasoned, but they were warm and real and hers. Each bite felt like reclaiming something. Each swallow felt like defiance. The man watched her eat, then took the empty bowl when she was done. "What's your name?" Miriam asked. "Jed," he said. "Jed Hartley." "I'm Miriam Dayne." He nodded as if he'd expected nothing less. "You can stay here long as you need, Miss Dayne. Got a cot, got food, got water. It ain't much, but it's yours." "Why?" she asked again. You don't know me. I can't pay you. I can't even. You don't owe me nothing, Jed interrupted. His voice was firm, but not harsh. You needed help. That's simple. Simple. As if decency was the easiest thing in the world. Maybe for him it was. Jed stood and moved toward the door. Get some rest. We'll figure the rest out tomorrow. Jed. He paused, one hand on the doorframe. Thank you, Miriam said, for seeing me. Jed looked back at her, and for just a moment the hardness in his eyes softened. You're easy to see, Miss Dayne, he said quietly. Folks just choose not to look. Then he was gone, and Miriam was alone in the gathering dark. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, she wasn't afraid. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the walls and whistling through the gaps. Somewhere in the workshop, tools clinked and shifted. And in the small house that smelled of cedar and second chances, Miriam Dayne closed her eyes and slept the sleep of the saved, not rescued, saved. There was a difference, and tomorrow she'd begin to learn what it meant. Morning came with the smell of coffee and sawdust. Miriam woke slowly, her body protesting every small movement. For a moment she didn't remember where she was, then the unfamiliar ceiling came into focus. Rough-hewn beams crossing above her head, and memory flooded back. The tent, the dying, the carpenter who'd carried her away from all of it. Jed. She turned her head and saw him through the open doorway, already at work, in the shop beyond. His back was to her shoulders, moving in steady rhythm as he planed a length of wood. Long curls of cedar peeled away from the blade, falling to the floor in pale spirals. The morning light came through the windows in dusty shafts, turning everything golden. He hadn't closed the door between them. That small detail struck her. He'd left it open so she could see out, so she wouldn't wake alone in a strange room. Miriam pushed herself up on her elbows, testing her strength. Her arms trembled but held. Better than yesterday. Everything was better than yesterday. You're awake. Jed's voice came without him turning around. He'd heard her moving somehow over the sound of his own work. Yes, Miriam said, her voice still rough from disuse. How did you? Floorboards creak. He set down the plane and finally looked at her, wiping his hands on his pants. You hungry? She was. Desperately. But something made her hesitate. I don't want to be a burden. Jed's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those Winter River eyes. Already told you you don't owe me nothing. That includes gratitude every time you need to eat. He moved to the small stove in the corner of the main room. Coffee's hot. Got some cornbread from yesterday, and eggs if you want them. Eggs would be... Miriam's throat tightened. Yes, thank you. He cracked 3 eggs into a pan without ceremony, the sizzle loud in the quiet morning. While they cooked, he poured coffee into 2 tin cups and brought one to her. She wrapped both hands around it, feeling the warmth seep into her palms. Can you sit up on your own today? He asked. She nodded and proved it, pushing herself upright against the wall. It hurt, everything hurt, but she managed it without help. Jed watched with an appraising eye, the same way he might examine a joint in a piece of furniture, checking if it would hold. Good, he said simply, and went back to the eggs. They ate in comfortable silence. Jed had pulled his work stool closer to the cot so she wouldn't have to reach far for her plate. The eggs were plain but perfectly cooked, the yolks still soft. Miriam ate slowly, savoring each bite, trying not to think about the moldy bread crust that had been her last meal under the tent. When they finished, Jed collected the plates without comment and took them to a basin. He washed them with the efficiency of someone long accustomed to doing for himself. Miriam watched his hands, scarred, capable hands that moved with quiet purpose. Jed. He glanced over his shoulder. What happened to you? The question came out before she could stop it. I mean, you're kind, but you're also... She struggled for the word. Careful, like you've been hurt before. For a long moment, he didn't answer. He just stood there with his hands in the dishwater, staring at nothing. Had a wife once, he said finally, his voice flat. And a daughter. Fever took them both in the same week 5 years back. He pulled his hands from the water and dried them on a cloth, buried them under a cottonwood tree in Kansas, and kept moving west. Figured if I stopped, I'd stop for good. "I'm sorry," Miriam whispered. "Don't be. Wasn't your doing." He hung the cloth on a nail and turned to face her fully. "Point is, I know what it's like when the world decides you don't matter, when people look through you like you're already a ghost." His jaw tightened. "So when I saw you under that tent, saw them all walking past like you were nothing." He stopped himself, shook his head. "I couldn't leave you there. Simple as that." Miriam felt something shift in her chest, some locked door creaking open. "You didn't save me because you pitied me." "No, ma'am, I didn't. You saved me because you saw me." Jed held her gaze for a long moment. "That's right." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was the kind of silence that comes when understanding passes between two people who've both learned that the world can be cruel but doesn't have to be. Finally, Jed cleared his throat. "I've got work to do. Got an order for a table that's already late." He gestured toward the workshop. "You need anything, you just holler. I'll hear you." "Can I watch?" The words surprised even Miriam. "I mean, if it won't bother you, I'd like to see." Something almost like a smile touched the corner of Jed's mouth. "Watching's free. Come on." He lifted her with the same careful strength he'd shown the day before, carrying her to a chair he positioned near his workbench, but out of the way of sawdust and flying wood chips. She felt the indignity of being carried, felt her useless legs dangling, but Jed's face showed nothing but concentration, as if she were simply another piece of lumber that needed moving from one place to another. Once she was settled, he returned to his work without fanfare. Miriam watched him shape wood for hours, watched the way he measured twice and cut once, the way he tested joints with his fingers, before committing them, the way he stood back periodically to examine his progress from a different angle. There was a meditation to his work, a kind of conversation between his hands and the materials. Nothing was forced. Nothing was rushed. "You're good at this," she said after a while. "Been doing it long enough." He ran his palm over a tabletop, feeling for imperfections. "My father was a carpenter, his father before him. Some things are in the blood, I suppose." "What happened to them?" "Dead. Both of them." He said it without emotion, just fact. "Pa taught me everything he knew before a bad cut got infected. That was 15 years ago. I was 19. Miriam did the math. "So you've been alone since then?" "More or less." He selected a chisel from a rack on the wall, tested its edge with his thumb. "Had the wife and daughter for a few good years in between, but yeah, mostly alone." "Doesn't it get lonely?" Jed paused, chisel in hand, and looked at her directly. "Loneliness is just quiet that you haven't learned to sit with yet." "I learned." But Miriam heard what he didn't say, that learning to sit with loneliness wasn't the same as preferring it, that a man could survive alone without wanting to. The days began to form a pattern. Jed would wake with the sun, start the coffee, and check on Miriam before beginning his work. She'd eat whatever simple breakfast he prepared, cornbread, eggs, occasionally bacon if he'd been to town. Then he'd carry her to the workshop chair, and she'd spend the day watching him transform raw lumber into furniture, into beauty, into purpose. At first she only watched, but on the fourth day she noticed a pile of leather strips on a shelf, stiff and unused. "What are those for?" she asked. Jed glanced up from the cabinet he was assembling. "Tool grips. Been meaning to wrap some handles, but haven't got around to it." He shrugged. "Not enough hours in the day." "I could do it." He looked at her skeptically. "You know how to work leather. My mother taught me to sew. It's not so different, is it?" Jed considered this, then retrieved the leather strips and a box of tools. An all-waxed thread, a knife for cutting. He brought them to her along with several chisel handles that needed wrapping. "Show me," he said. Miriam took a piece of leather and a handle, feeling the weight of both. Her hands remembered the motions, even if her mind had nearly forgotten the way to soak the leather, just enough to make it pliable, the angle to cut for a clean edge, the tension needed to wrap it tight. She worked slowly, carefully, while Jed watched. When she finished, he took the handle and examined her work, turned it over, tested the grip. Then he nodded. "Good work," he said. "Clean, tight, better than I would have done." Pride bloomed warm in Miriam's chest, pride she hadn't felt in so long she'd forgotten what it was like. "I can do the others," she said, "if you want." "I want." He set a box of unfinished handles beside her chair. "Take your time, do them right." So she did. While Jed cut and planed and sanded, Miriam wrapped tool handles. Her fingers grew sore, then tough. The leather strips multiplied, some for chisels, others for hammers, a few for specialty tools whose purposes she didn't understand, but wrapped anyway. And with each completed handle she felt a little less like a burden, and a little more like a person with purpose. Jed noticed. "You're good with your hands," he said one afternoon, watching her finish a particularly tricky wrap around an odd-shaped rasp handle. "They're the only part of me that still works right," Miriam replied, trying to keep the bitterness from her voice. Jed set down his saw. "Your mind works fine too, and your voice, and your eyes. I've seen you looking at my measurements, catching mistakes before I make them." She blinked, surprised. "You noticed that?" "I notice everything in my workshop, Miss Dayne." He leaned against the bench, arms crossed. "You've got a good eye for detail. For precision, that's worth something." "Is it?" The question came out smaller than she intended. "Worth enough to make up for," she gestured at her legs. "Make up for," Jed's voice hardened, not with anger, but with something fierce and protective. "You don't have to make up for anything. You're not a deficit that needs balancing. You're just a person who's good at some things and needs help with others, same as everybody else on God's earth." Miriam stared at him, something hot and unexpected burning behind her eyes. "No one's ever said that to me before." Then no one was paying attention. He picked up his saw again. "Now you see that cabinet I'm working on? The doors are going to need sanding. My hands are too big to get into the corners smooth. You interested?" She was. By the end of the second week, Miriam had graduated from leather work to sanding. Jed brought her pieces that required delicate touch, carved details, tight corners, surfaces that couldn't tolerate aggressive technique. She worked with fine grit paper, her strokes slow and methodical, feeling for the grain of the wood, learning to let it guide her hand. "You're a natural," Jed said one evening, examining a cabinet door she'd finished. "This is masterwork, Miss Dayne. Not just good masterwork." The compliment settled into her bones like warmth. That night, after a simple dinner of stew and bread, Jed didn't immediately carry her back to the cot. Instead, he hesitated by the table, his hand resting on the back of his chair. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, "about making some changes to the shop. Maybe set up a proper station for you, something at the right height with storage for the work you're doing, so you don't have to balance everything in your lap." Miriam's breath caught. "A station for me? Why not?" He met her eyes. "You're doing good work, might as well be comfortable doing it." "But I can't. I'm not—" She struggled for words. "This is your shop, Jed. I'm just staying here until—" "Until what?" His voice was gentle but unyielding. "Until you're healed. You're not going to heal, Miss Dayne. Not in the way you're thinking." He pulled out the chair and sat across from her. "So the question isn't whether you're staying temporarily. The question is whether you want to stay at all. And if you do, then you get a proper workspace, because this is your shop too now. Simple as that." Miriam felt the words hit her chest like a physical thing. Your shop too. Not his charity case, not his burden, his partner. "I want to stay," she whispered. Then it settled. Jed stood and began clearing the dishes. "I'll start building your station tomorrow." That night, when he carried her back to the cot and pulled the blanket over her legs, Miriam caught his wrist. His skin was warm and rough under her fingers. "Jed," he looked down at her, waiting. "Thank you," she said. "Not for saving me, for letting me be useful." Something shifted in his expression, something soft and unguarded that was gone almost as soon as it appeared. "You don't need my permission to be useful, Miss Dayne. You just needed the chance to prove it." He pulled away gently and moved toward the door to his own small room, barely more than a closet with a bed she'd noticed while she occupied the only real bedroom in the house. "Good night," he said. "Good night, Jed." But before he closed the door, she heard him pause. "Miriam," he said quietly, his back still to her. "You can call me just Jed. No need for formality between people who work together." "All right," she said. "Jed. And I'll call you Miriam if that's acceptable." "It is." The door closed with a soft click, and Miriam lay in the darkness, her heart doing something strange and unfamiliar in her chest. For the first time since the fever had stolen her legs, she felt the future opening up instead of closing down, felt possibility instead of limitation, felt seen and valued and wanted, not for what she could be, but for what she already was. Outside, the desert wind sang through the Joshua trees. Inside, the workshop settled and creaked timbers, cooling sawdust, drifting. And in the small house that smelled of cedar and second chances, Miriam Dayne closed her eyes and smiled. Tomorrow, Jed would build her a workspace. Tomorrow, she would become something more than a woman who'd been left to die. Tomorrow, she would become a carpenter. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like coming home. True to his word, Jed began building the workstation the next morning. Miriam watched from her chair as he measured and sketched his pencil moving across a scrap of wood in quick, confident strokes. He worked differently than usual, pausing more often, stepping back to look at her, then at the drawing, then back at her again. She realized he was measuring her, calculating heights and reaches, without ever making her feel studied or examined. "The bench needs to be 28 inches, he muttered more to himself than to her. "Storage underneath shallow drawers on the right side where you can reach without stretching." He tapped the pencil against his teeth. "And a good light. Can't do fine work in shadows." "Jed, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to." He didn't look up from his sketch. "I want to. There's a difference." By afternoon, the frame was taking shape. Miriam had returned to sanding a set of cabinet doors, but she found herself glancing up every few minutes to watch Jed work. There was something intimate about watching someone build something specifically for you, something that existed only because you existed. Each joint he cut, each board, he planed it was all for her. "You're staring," Jed said, without turning around. Miriam felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I'm observing. There's a difference." The corner of his mouth twitched, the closest thing to a smile she'd seen from him yet. 3 days later, the workstation was finished. It was beautiful in its simplicity. A solid oak bench at exactly the right height, with a smooth work surface and clever storage built into every available space. The drawers slid like silk. The lamp, mounted on an adjustable arm, could be positioned anywhere she needed it, and carved into the front edge, almost invisible unless you knew to look for it, were her initials, MD. Miriam traced the letters with her fingertip, unable to speak. "Figured you should mark your territory," Jed said gruffly. "Every craftsman does." "Craftsman," she repeated softly. "Is that what I am? What else would you call someone who makes things with skill and care?" He gestured to the row of tools he'd arranged within her reach: sanding blocks, rasps, small planes, finishing brushes. "These are yours now. Take care of them, and they'll take care of you." That afternoon, Jed carried her to her new station for the first time. When he set her in the chair, a proper chair with a cushioned seat and back support, everything aligned perfectly. Her hands fell naturally to the work surface. The tools were exactly where she needed them, the light illuminated without glare. Jed had built this entire station around her body, her needs, her capabilities. "How does it feel?" he asked, standing back with his arms crossed. Miriam ran her hands over the smooth oak surface, opened and closed a drawer to feel the perfect fit, adjusted the lamp to see how easily it moved. Then she looked up at him, and her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. "It feels like I matter," she said. Jed's expression softened. "You do matter, Miriam. You always did. Some folks just needed reminding." They worked side by side for weeks after that, falling into a rhythm that felt less like teacher and student and more like true partnership. Jed would rough out the large pieces, tables, chairs, cabinets, while Miriam handled the detail work that required patience and precision. She became expert at finishing, at coaxing wood to reveal its hidden beauty through careful sanding and oiling. Her hands grew strong and sure, calloused in new places. The orders kept coming. Word had spread about the quality of work coming from Jed Hartley's shop, though no one in town knew about Miriam's contribution. Jed never corrected them, but in the privacy of the workshop he made sure she knew the truth. "This grain matching on the cabinet doors," he said one evening, examining a piece she'd just finished. "That's what makes the difference between furniture and art. You did that, Miriam, not me." She glowed under his praise, not because she needed his approval, but because it came from someone whose opinion she'd learned to value. Jed didn't give compliments lightly. When he said something was good, he meant it. But she noticed something else changing too. The way Jed lingered near her workstation when he didn't need to. The way his hand would brush her shoulder in passing, casual and brief, but somehow intentional. The way he'd started telling her stories while they worked, about his childhood in Pennsylvania, about his father's stubborn insistence on hand-cut dovetails, about the first piece of furniture he'd ever sold. And she found herself sharing too, about her mother's garden in Ohio, about the books she'd loved before the fever, about the sister who'd braided her hair every morning and then abandoned her without a second glance. "Do you miss them?" Jed asked one day. Miriam considered the question while she brushed oil onto a tabletop, watching the wood darken and deepen. "I miss who I thought they were, but the people who left me to die under that tent, those aren't the people I remember. Maybe they never were." "Their loss," Jed said quietly. She looked up at him, surprised. "What?" "I said it's their loss." He met her eyes steadily. "They threw away something precious because they couldn't see past the surface. That's on them, not you." Something shifted in that moment, some final barrier falling away. Miriam felt it in her chest, in her throat, in the way her heart suddenly seemed too large for her ribcage. But before she could find words for what she was feeling, Jed cleared his throat and turned back to his work, and the moment passed. That night, though, after dinner, Jed didn't immediately carry her to bed. Instead, he sat across from her at the table, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee gone cold, his expression unreadable. "I've been thinking about something," he said finally. Miriam waited, her own cup warming her palms. "You're doing good work here, real good work, but there's something holding you back, and it's not your skills." He looked at her directly. "It's the fact that I have to carry you everywhere. That you can't move yourself from station to bed, from workshop to house. You're dependent on me for something that's got nothing to do with your actual abilities." Miriam felt her stomach tighten. Was this it? Was he finally going to admit she was too much trouble after all? "I know," she said quietly. "I'm sorry." "Don't!" His voice was sharp, cutting through her apology. "Don't apologize for something that's not your fault. That's not what I'm saying." He leaned forward. "What I'm saying is, I think I can fix it." She blinked. "Fix it, Jed? I can't walk. No amount of carpentry can't fix your legs," he interrupted. "But I can give you wheels." The words hung in the air between them. "Wheels," Miriam repeated, not understanding. Jed stood and walked to a corner of the workshop she couldn't see from the table. When he returned, he was carrying something, a drawing more detailed than any sketch she'd seen him make before. He spread it on the table between them. It was a chair, but not like any chair Miriam had ever seen. It had large wheels on either side, smaller ones in front, and a framework designed to support a person's body while allowing their arms free movement. The seat was padded, the back was adjustable, and every measurement, every angle was marked with precise notation. "It's called a wheelchair," Jed said. Or that's what the hospital in Denver called it when I saw one being used there years ago. Helped a man who'd been paralyzed in a mining accident. He could move himself around, go where he wanted, without needing someone to carry him. Jed's finger traced the design. I've been thinking about it since the day I brought you here. Wondering if I could build one. Wondering if I should even suggest it, or if that would be... He trailed off, uncertain. Miriam stared at the drawing, her mind racing. Independence, freedom, the ability to move through the world on her own terms, without waiting for someone to lift her, carry her position, her like a piece of furniture. You've been planning this, she whispered, since the first week. He wouldn't meet her eyes. I know it's not the same as walking. I know it won't fix everything, but I thought maybe it would help, give you back some of what you lost. Miriam reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. His skin was warm, rough, with calluses that matched her own now. When can we start? She asked. Jed finally looked up, and the relief in his face was like sunrise. Tomorrow, we'll start tomorrow. Building the wheelchair became their shared obsession. Jed worked on the frame and wheels, salvaging parts from an old wagon and reinforcing them to handle daily use. Miriam crafted the seat and back cushions, stitching heavy canvas and stuffing it with horsehair until it was firm but forgiving. Together, they solved problems as they arose: how to make the wheels turn smoothly without complicated mechanisms, how to position the hand rims so Miriam could grip them comfortably, how to add a brake so the chair wouldn't roll away on slopes. Every evening they'd sit at the table and discuss the day's progress, sketching modifications, debating solutions. Jed listened to Miriam's input with the same seriousness he'd give another craftsman, and when her suggestions were better than his, which was often, he implemented them without ego. The armrests need to be lower, she said one night, demonstrating the angle her arms needed to push the wheels effectively, and curved, not straight, so they don't dig into my forearms. You're right. Jed made notes on the drawing. I'll recut them tomorrow. I can do it, Miriam said, if you show me how to use the spoke shave properly. He did, and she learned, and the armrests she carved were perfect. 6 weeks after Jed had first shown her the drawing, the wheelchair was finished. It sat in the center of the workshop like a promise made solid. The wheels gleamed with fresh oil. The leather seat was supple and strong. The frame was sturdy enough to last years, but light enough for Miriam to maneuver, and carved discreetly into the wooden push handles were both sets of initials, JH and MD. Miriam stared at it from her workstation, unable to breathe. Ready to try it? Jed asked softly. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Jed lifted her as he had 100 times before, but this time he carried her to the wheelchair. He lowered her slowly, carefully, making sure she was centered and balanced. Then he stepped back. The hand rims are right there, he said, pointing to the metal loops attached to the outer wheels. Push forward to go forward, pull back to stop, or reverse. Use one side more than the other to turn. It'll feel strange at first, but you'll get the hang of it. Miriam gripped the hand rims. They were cool and solid under her palms. She took a breath and pushed. The chair rolled forward, just a few inches jerky and uneven, but it moved. She moved it, under her own power by her own choice. She pushed again, harder this time. The chair rolled across the workshop floor, picking up speed. She pulled back on the rims, and it stopped. She pushed the right wheel forward and the left wheel back, and the chair spun in place. A laugh bubbled up from somewhere deep in her chest, shocked and wild and free. Jed, I'm moving, I'm actually... She spun in another circle, faster this time, then rolled toward the open doorway. The afternoon sunlight spilled across the threshold, bright and warm and full of possibility. She crossed it, for the first time. In 2 years, Miriam moved, from inside to outside without being carried. She rolled into the yard, feeling the slight resistance of gravel under the wheels, learning to adjust her push to compensate. The sky stretched overhead, vast and blue. The smell of sage rode the wind, and she was in it, part of it, not watching from a window or a carried position, but here, present, mobile. She rolled in a wide circle around the yard, testing the chair's capabilities, learning its rhythms. Then she stopped and looked back at the workshop door. Jed stood in the opening, arms crossed, watching her. But his eyes were bright, and when Miriam laughed again, pure joy this time, uncomplicated and fierce, she saw him smile. A real smile, the first she'd ever seen from him. "You built this for me," she called out. "You gave me this." "We built it," he corrected, walking toward her. "You sanded every spoke, stitched that seat, carved those armrests. This chair is as much yours as mine." Miriam looked down at the wheels, at the hand rims. Her palms were already learning to love at the framework that was both functional and beautiful. Then she looked back up at Jed, and something in her chest cracked open. "You're not tied to anything," he said quietly, standing beside the chair now. "Go where you want. Be what you want. This chair, it's yours to keep, whether you stay here or not." "I'm not going anywhere," Miriam said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Jed crouched down so they were eye to eye. "You sure? Because if you wanted to leave, I'd understand. I'd help you. Get you set up somewhere in town maybe, or—" "Jed." She reached out and cupped his bearded jaw with one calloused hand. "I already went where I wanted. I'm here, with you." Something shifted in his expression, vulnerability, hope, fear, all tangled together. "Miriam, I know," she said softly. "I know." And she did know. She knew that he loved her, had probably loved her since the day he'd wrapped a blanket around her legs, without pity. She knew that she loved him too, loved his quiet strength and careful hands, and the way he saw her as whole when the rest of the world saw her as broken. Jed's hand came up to cover hers where it rested against his face. "I never thought I'd feel this again," he said roughly. "After Mary and Elizabeth died, I thought that part of me was buried with them. But you—" His voice caught. "You make me want to believe in tomorrow again." "Then believe," Miriam whispered. "We'll believe together." He leaned forward and pressed his forehead to hers. They stayed like that for a long moment, breathing the same air, sharing the same space. Then Jed pulled back and stood, offering his hand. "Want to see how fast this thing can go?" he asked, and there was something almost playful in his voice. Miriam grinned. "Race you to the fence line. You're on." They spent the rest of the afternoon testing the wheelchair's limits. Miriam rolled across every surface, gravel, hard-packed dirt, grass, even the wooden floor of the workshop. She learned to navigate obstacles, to use momentum for slopes to brake smoothly, and Jed stayed close, not hovering but present, ready to help if she needed it, but trusting her to figure things out on her own. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, they sat together on the porch. Jed in his old rocking chair, Miriam beside him in her new wheelchair. The desert stretched out before them, vast and beautiful, and no longer a prison. "Thank you," Miriam said quietly. "For what? For seeing me when I was invisible. For treating me like I mattered when everyone else decided I didn't. For building me a chair, yes, but more than that, for building me a life." Jed reached over and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "You built your own life, Miriam. I just gave you the tools." She squeezed his hand, feeling the future unfold before them like a map with no borders. There would be challenges ahead, she knew that. The world wouldn't suddenly become kind just because she had wheels, but with Jed beside her and her own 2 hands on the wheel rims, she could face whatever came. "Jed," she said, as darkness began to fall. "Yeah, I love you." The words hung in the cooling air, simple and true. Jed turned to look at her, and in the fading light his eyes were soft. "I love you too, Miriam Dayne," he said. "More than I've got words for." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge one by one until the sky was full of light. And for the first time since a fever had stolen her legs, and her family had stolen her hope, Miriam felt completely, entirely, perfectly whole. Not because she could walk, but because she was loved for exactly who she was. The wheelchair changed everything, and yet nothing at all. Miriam still woke to the smell of coffee and sawdust, still spent her days at her workstation finishing pieces with the same care and precision she'd developed over the months. Still ate simple meals with Jed at the old wooden table. But now she moved through these rhythms under her own power, rolling from bedroom to workshop to porch, without waiting for hands to lift her. The first morning she'd wheeled herself to the breakfast table, Jed had looked up from the stove with an expression she couldn't quite read, pride maybe, or relief, or something deeper that neither of them had words for yet. "Coffee?" he'd asked, as casual as if she'd been doing this forever. "Please," she'd answered, and just like that, a new normal was born. Winter came to the Arizona desert, bringing cold nights and crystalline mornings. Miriam learned to navigate the workshop in all weather, discovered which paths were easiest. When frost made the ground treacherous, figured out how to position her chair near the stove for maximum warmth without being in Jed's way. They worked through the short days and long evenings, their hands creating beauty while their hearts created something else entirely, something neither had expected to find again. The cot in the bedroom had been replaced. Jed had built a proper bed frame low enough for Miriam to transfer herself from wheelchair to mattress without help. He'd done it without fanfare, simply carried the finished frame in one morning and assembled it while she worked. "Figured you deserved better than a cot," he'd said when she'd stared at it speechless. "Everyone does," but he'd made no move to share it. Still slept in his small room off the workshop, still maintained a respectful distance, even as their conversations grew longer and their silences more comfortable. Miriam understood Jed was a man who'd lost everything once before. He wouldn't rush into anything, wouldn't risk what they'd built on assumptions or impulse. So she waited and worked and loved him quietly while he loved her back the same way. The orders kept coming. A dining set for the banker in town, a cradle for a young couple expecting their first child, a desk for the school teacher. Jed took the commissions and brought them home, and together he and Miriam transformed raw lumber into heirlooms. The town still didn't know about her. Jed went into town alone for supplies and deliveries, never mentioning the skilled hands that finished every piece he sold. "Don't you want them to know?" Miriam asked one day, running her fingers over a table leg she'd just sanded to silk. "That I do this work too?" Jed looked up from the mortise he was cutting. "Do you want them to know?" She considered. The town that had let her die. The people who'd stepped over her body like she was trash in the street. Did she want their recognition, their approval? "No," she said finally. "No, I don't think I do." "Then that's settled." He went back to his chisel. "The work speaks for itself, doesn't need names attached." But Miriam caught the way he smiled when he thought she wasn't looking pleased, protective, proud. He knew what she was capable of, and for Jed that was enough. Spring arrived with wildflowers and warm winds. Miriam had been with Jed for nearly a year now, though it felt both longer and shorter than that. Longer because the woman who'd lain dying under that canvas tent seemed like a different person entirely, someone from another life. Shorter because every day brought new discoveries. A better way to join two pieces of wood, a perfect grain pattern revealed. Under oil, the exact pressure needed to coax a stubborn knot into smoothness. Or the way Jed's hand would linger on her shoulder when he passed behind her chair. Or the way he'd started saying "we" instead of "I" when talking about the future. Or the way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was focused on her work, like she was something precious he was afraid might disappear. One afternoon in early April, they were both working in comfortable silence when the sound of a horse stopped outside. Miriam glanced at Jed, who frowned. They weren't expecting anyone. Jed wiped his hands on his pants and stepped to the workshop door. Miriam wheeled closer, curious. A man dismounted in the yard, middle-aged, well-dressed in a suit, too fine for the desert with a face that looked familiar in a way that made Miriam's stomach clench. "Can I help you?" Jed asked, his voice carefully neutral. The man removed his hat and smiled a politician's smile, all teeth and no warmth. "I'm looking for Jedediah Hartley, the carpenter." "You found him. Excellent." The man's eyes drifted past Jed to the workshop interior, landing on Miriam before quickly sliding away. "I'm Thomas Brennan, representing the Dayne family. I believe you may have something that belongs to them." The world tilted. Miriam's hands tightened on her wheel rims. The Dayne family. Her family. After a year of silence, they'd sent someone. "I don't have anything that belongs to anyone but me," Jed said flatly. "Come now." Brennan's smile didn't waver. "We both know that's not quite true. The family received word that their daughter Miriam might be living here. They're concerned about her welfare, naturally, want to ensure she's being properly cared for." "Concerned about her welfare?" Jed's voice could have cut glass. "That's interesting, considering they left her to die in the dirt. I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding." Miriam wheeled forward into the doorway beside Jed. "They abandoned me because I was paralyzed, because I was worthless to them." Brennan's smile faltered when he saw the wheelchair, then recovered. "Miss Dayne, your family has been quite worried. They're prepared to make arrangements for your care, find you a suitable facility where—" "I have care," Miriam interrupted. "I have a home, I have work, I have everything I need." "Be that as it may, you're an unmarried woman living with a man who's not your family. Surely you can see how that appears." Brennan's tone turned condescending. "Your father is a respected preacher. He has a reputation to maintain. Having his daughter living in sin. Miriam laughed, sharp and bitter. "Is that what he calls it when someone saves a life he threw away? Miss Dayne, I understand you're emotional, but you understand nothing." She wheeled closer and Brennan took an involuntary step back. "My father left me under a tent with 2 days of food and water. He left me to die alone while an entire town walked past. The only person who showed me any humanity was Jed. And if my father has a problem with that, he can come tell me himself instead of sending a lawyer to clean up his guilty conscience." Brennan's professional mask cracked, showing irritation beneath. "Your family is prepared to make this worth Mr. Hartley's time, a sum of money for the care he's provided, plus expenses for transporting you to a proper facility." "Get off my property." Jed's voice was quiet but absolute. "Now see here." "I said, get off my property." Jed took a step forward, and there was something in his posture that made Brennan retreat toward his horse. "Miriam is exactly where she wants to be. She's not property to be bought or bargained for. She's not a problem to be solved or hidden away. She's a grown woman with a mind of her own, and she's told you her answer. The family won't be pleased. The family," Miriam said coldly, "can go straight to hell." Brennan's face flushed red. He mounted his horse with jerky movements, his politician's composure completely shattered. "You're making a mistake," he said, looking down at Miriam. "Living here, pretending to be his wife, doing God knows what." "I'm not pretending anything," Miriam said. "I work here, I live here, and if that offends your delicate sensibilities or my father's precious reputation, then you can tell them both that the daughter they left to die has no interest in their forgiveness or their money or their concern." Brennan opened his mouth, closed it, then wheeled his horse around and galloped back toward town, dust rising in angry clouds behind him. The silence that followed was deafening. Miriam felt her hands shaking on the wheel rims, felt adrenaline coursing through her veins, hot and sharp, felt something like triumph mixed with old grief, because even now, even after everything, some small part of her had hoped her family might actually care. "Miriam," Jed's hand settled on her shoulder, warm and grounding. "You all right?" "I told my father to go to hell," she said, and started laughing, high and slightly hysterical. "I told him through his lawyer, but still, I actually said it." "You did." There was something like pride in Jed's voice. "You stood up for yourself. For us. She reached up and covered his hand with hers. He wanted to take me away, put me in some facility where I'd be hidden from sight, where no one would have to think about me or deal with me or... Her voice cracked, as if I'm something shameful. Hey, Jed crouched beside her chair. Look at me. She did. His Winter River eyes were fierce and gentle all at once. You are not shameful, he said. You are brilliant and skilled and strong. You built that table in there that the banker's paying a small fortune for. You carved the details on that cradle that'll be passed down for generations. You are a craftsman, Miriam. You are my partner. And if your family can't see that, then they're blind fools who don't deserve you. Miriam felt tears spill over, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were something cleaner, something freeing. I don't need them, she whispered. I don't need their approval or their guilt money or their concern. I have everything I need right here. You do, Jed agreed. And they can't take it away. Nobody can. She pulled him close, wrapping her arms around his neck, feeling his strength and solidity and absolute certainty. He held her tight, one hand cradling the back of her head, and Miriam understood that this was what family was supposed to be, not blood, not obligation, but choice. The choice to stay when leaving would be easier. The choice to build when destroying would be simpler. The choice to love when indifference would be safer. When they finally pulled apart, the sun was lower in the sky, painting everything gold. Come on, Jed said, standing and offering his hand. Let's finish up for the day. I think we've earned an early dinner. They ate on the porch that evening, watching the desert bloom in the spring warmth. After the dishes were cleared, Jed disappeared into his room and returned with something small wrapped in cloth. I was going to wait, he said, sitting in the rocking chair beside her wheelchair. Find the right moment, the right words. But after today, after watching you stand up to that bastard, I realized there's no such thing as the perfect moment. There's just now. He unwrapped the cloth, revealing a silver ring, simple, unadorned, but catching the last light of day like captured starshine. It's not much, Jed said, and his voice was rough. Just silver I bought from the blacksmith and shaped myself, but I needed you to know that this isn't temporary for me, that you're not temporary, that if you'll have me, I want to spend whatever time I've got left making sure you never doubt that you're loved. Miriam stared at the ring, then at Jed, then back at the ring. Her heart was doing something complicated in her chest, expanding and contracting and threatening to crack her ribs with the force of it. Jed Hartley, she said softly, are you asking me to marry you? I am. He met her eyes steadily. I know I'm not much, just a carpenter with a small shop and a lot of ghosts. I know I can't give you fancy things or a big house or... Stop! Miriam reached out and took the ring from his palm. It was warm from his skin, smooth from his careful polishing. You gave me my life back. You gave me purpose and dignity and a home. You gave me wheels, Jed. You gave me the world. She slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly because, of course, it did. Jed never did anything by half measures. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. Today, tomorrow, whenever you want. Yes. Jed's face transformed. The careful control he always maintained cracked open, revealing joy so pure it was almost painful to witness. He knelt beside her chair and took her face in both hands, his calloused palms gentle against her cheeks. I love you, he said. God, Miriam, I love you so much it scares me sometimes. I love you too, she whispered back. More than I knew I could love anything. He kissed her, then soft and careful and full of promise. When they pulled apart, both were smiling and the desert evening wrapped around them like a benediction. We'll need to go to town, Jed said eventually. Find the circuit judge, make it legal. Let them see, Miriam said. Let the whole town see that the woman they left to die is now someone's wife, someone's partner, someone's equal. You were always those things, Jed said. The ring just makes it official. They sat together as darkness fell, making quiet plans for the future. A wedding simple and small. Maybe some improvements to the house, a bigger bedroom, a better stove, eventually a proper bath. Maybe taking on an apprentice someday, someone to learn the trade and carry it forward. Maybe children, though neither was certain how that would work or if it could. "We'll figure it out as we go," Jed said. "Same as we've figured out everything else." "Together," Miriam added. "Together," he agreed. Later, when Jed carried her to bed because some things didn't need to change, and she loved the way he held her like she was precious, he paused in the doorway. "You know what tomorrow is?" he asked. "Wednesday. It's exactly 1 year since I found you under that tent." His voice was quiet. 1 year since the worst day of your life became the best day of mine. Miriam touched his face, feeling the beard she'd grown to love, the weathered skin, the strength beneath it all. "It was the best day of mine too," she said. "I just didn't know it yet." He carried her to the bed and stayed close while she settled under the blankets. Then, instead of leaving as he usually did, he sat on the edge of the mattress. "I know I'm supposed to wait until the wedding," he said. "Be proper and all that, but would it be all right if I just stayed here tonight, not for anything improper, just to be close, to know you're real and here and mine?" Miriam's throat tightened with emotion. "Jed Hartley, you can stay in this bed every night for the rest of our lives, and it still won't be enough time with you." So he did. He kicked off his boots, lay down beside her on top of the blankets, and pulled her against his chest. She felt his heartbeat steady and strong and matched her breathing to his. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For everything, for all of it." "Nothing to thank me for," he murmured, already half asleep. "You're the gift, Miriam. You always were." She lay awake long after his breathing deepened into sleep, her ring catching moonlight from the window, her hand resting over his heart. Outside, coyotes sang their wild songs to the stars. Inside, two broken people lay tangled together, made whole not by fixing what was damaged, but by accepting it, honoring it, and building something beautiful anyway. Miriam closed her eyes and smiled. Tomorrow they'd go to town as an engaged couple. Tomorrow they'd face whatever judgment or gossip came their way. Tomorrow they'd continue building furniture and a life and a future together. But tonight they simply rested in the certainty that love didn't require perfection. It only required presence. And presence, Miriam had learned, was the greatest gift of all. Morning brought clarity and purpose the way it always did after momentous decisions. Miriam woke wrapped in Jed's arms, his chest rising and falling against her back in the steady rhythm of deep sleep. The silver ring on her finger caught the early light streaming through the window, and for a moment she simply stared at it, marveling at how something so small could carry so much weight. She was going to be Jed's wife, not his charity case, not his burden, not the woman he'd rescued, his wife, his equal, his partner in every way that mattered. She felt him stir behind her, his arm tightening around her waist. "Morning," he murmured against her hair. "Morning." She laced her fingers through his. "Sleep well. Better than I have in years." He pressed a kiss to her shoulder. "You. Same." They lay there in comfortable silence until the sun climbed higher and the day's work called to them. Jed helped Miriam into her wheelchair, then went to start the coffee while she wheeled herself to the small mirror he'd mounted low on the wall for her. Her hair was a mess, her face creased from the pillow, but her eyes were bright in a way they hadn't been in the years before Jed. She looked alive. She looked happy. She looked like herself. Over breakfast, Jed mapped out the day's plan. "We'll finish the banker's table this morning, just needs final oiling. Then I thought we could head into town this afternoon, talk to Judge Morrison about setting a date." "You're not worried about what people will say?" Miriam asked, spreading butter on a piece of toast. Jed shrugged. "People talked when I kept to myself. They'll talk when I marry you. Folks always find something to say. Doesn't mean we have to listen." They worked through the morning with practiced efficiency, putting the finishing touches on the dining table that had occupied their shop for 3 weeks. It was a beautiful piece, rich walnut with hand-carved legs, and a surface Miriam had sanded and oiled until it glowed like warm honey. When Jed ran his hand over the top, checking for imperfections one final time, he nodded with satisfaction. "This is some of our best work," he said. "The grain matching the finish, it's perfect." "Our work?" Miriam repeated softly, loving the sound of it. They loaded the table onto Jed's wagon piece by piece, securing it carefully for the journey to town. Then Jed lifted Miriam from her wheelchair and set her on the wagon seat beside him, folding the chair and stowing it in the back. "Ready?" he asked, taking up the reins. Miriam looked at the simple silver ring on her finger, then at Jed's profile, strong and weathered and dear. "Ready." The ride into town took an hour, the wagon creaking along the rutted road, while the desert spread out on either side in shades of brown and green and gold. Miriam had rarely left the shop since Jed brought her there, and she'd forgotten how vast the world was, how endless the sky. Her wheelchair gave her mobility within the boundaries of home, but this was freedom of a different kind. "You're quiet," Jed observed, "just thinking." She watched a hawk circle overhead. "About how much has changed in a year, how much I've changed." "You haven't changed," Jed said. "You just got the chance to show who you always were." They reached town just before noon. Miriam felt eyes turn toward them as Jed drove the wagon down the main street, the same street where she'd lain dying just 12 months ago. Some faces she recognized: the woman in the yellow bonnet who'd looked away, the merchant who'd stepped over her, the preacher who'd called her condition the Lord's will. Not one of them had helped her. And now she sat upright in a wagon beside a good man wearing a ring, heading to arrange her wedding. The irony wasn't lost on her. Jed pulled up in front of the general store and helped Miriam into her wheelchair with the same careful efficiency he brought to everything. A few people stopped to stare at the chair, at her, at Jed's protective hand on her shoulder. "Let them look," Jed murmured. "You've got nothing to be ashamed of." "I know," Miriam said, and meant it. They delivered the table to the banker's house first. The man's wife examined it with a critical eye, running her fingers over the surface, checking the joints, testing the stability. Finally, she smiled. "It's exquisite," she said. "Worth every penny." The banker paid Jed in cash and gold coin, more money than Miriam had ever seen at once. As they left, she heard the wife say to her husband, "That Carpenter does remarkable work. Best furniture maker in 3 territories. If she only knew, Miriam thought, suppressing a smile. They found Judge Morrison at the courthouse, a white-haired man with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. He looked at Miriam's wheelchair with curiosity but not pity, which immediately endeared him to her. "Jed Hartley," the judge said, shaking Jed's hand. "Haven't seen you in town for months. What brings you by?" "Want to get married," Jed said simply. "This is Miriam Dayne. She's agreed to be my wife." Morrison's eyebrows rose. "Is that so?" He looked at Miriam. "You sure about this, Miss? Jed's a good man, but he's also stubborn as a mule and twice as ornery." "I'm sure," Miriam said, "and I can be just as stubborn, so we're well matched." The judge laughed. "Fair enough. When were you thinking?" "Soon as possible," Jed said. "This week, if you can manage it." Morrison consulted a ledger. "I can do Saturday afternoon, 2 o'clock. You'll need 2 witnesses. You got anyone in mind?" Jed frowned. He didn't have friends in town, didn't socialize, didn't owe anyone favors or expect them in return. Miriam reached for his hand. "We'll figure it out," she said. But as they left the courthouse, Miriam felt a flutter of concern. A wedding with no guests, no witnesses beyond the required legal minimum. Was that really what she wanted? She'd already lost her family. Did she have to lose the ceremony too? "What's wrong?" Jed asked, reading her expression. "Nothing. Just thinking about witnesses." "The blacksmith might do it," Jed mused. "He's a decent sort, and maybe—" "Excuse me." They turned to find a woman standing behind them, middle-aged with work-worn hands and a simple dress. Miriam recognized her vaguely from the months before, though she couldn't place where. "I'm sorry to intrude," the woman said, wringing her hands nervously. "But I overheard you talking to Judge Morrison. You're getting married." "We are," Jed said cautiously. The woman looked at Miriam and her eyes filled with tears. "You're the girl who was left under the tent, aren't you? The one everyone walked past." Miriam's spine stiffened. "I am." "I'm so sorry." The words came out in a rush. "I walked past you, too, twice, and both times I told myself it wasn't my business, that someone else would help, that—" She stopped, swallowing hard. "There's no excuse. I knew it was wrong, and I did it anyway. I've carried that shame for a year now." Silence hung between them. Jed's hand tightened on Miriam's shoulder, ready to defend her, but she held up one hand to stop him. "What's your name?" Miriam asked quietly. "Sarah. Sarah Jenkins." "Well, Sarah Jenkins, I appreciate the apology, but what's done is done. I survived. I'm here, and I'm happy." Sarah nodded, wiping her eyes. "I can see that, and I'm glad, but I was wondering if you need witnesses for the wedding. I'd be honored to stand for you, as a way to make amends, if nothing else." Miriam studied the woman's face, saw genuine remorse there, genuine desire to do better, and she thought about the person she'd been under, that tent, bitter, angry, ready to hate everyone who'd abandoned her. That woman would have refused. That woman would have held the grudge until it consumed her, but she wasn't that woman anymore. "All right," Miriam said. "You can be a witness." Sarah's face lit up. "Thank you. Thank you so much." She paused. "And if you need anything else, a dress, flowers, someone to help prepare—" "A dress would be nice," Miriam admitted. She had nothing suitable for a wedding, just the simple work clothes she wore in the shop. "I'll take care of it," Sarah promised. "I'll bring some options by before Saturday. Where are you living?" "Hartley's Carpentry," Jed said. "Follow the road west about an hour." They parted ways, and Jed helped Miriam back onto the wagon. As they headed out of town, he glanced at her. "That was generous," he said, "forgiving her like that." "I didn't forgive her," Miriam said. "Not entirely, but I'm choosing not to carry the weight of what she did wrong. That's different." "Is it?" "Yes." She looked at him. "Forgiveness is for them. Letting go is for me." Jed smiled, slow and warm. "You're wiser than I gave you credit for." "I learned from a good teacher." They made one more stop before leaving town at the Mercantile for supplies. While Jed loaded flour and sugar and coffee, Miriam wheeled herself around the store, examining fabrics and notions she hadn't seen in years. A bolt of blue cotton caught her eye, the color of summer sky, simple but beautiful. "See something you like?" the shopkeeper asked. He was young, new to town, and thankfully hadn't been there the day Miriam was left to die. "Just looking," she said, but Jed appeared beside her, following her gaze. "How much for 3 yards of that blue—" "Jed, you don't have to—" "How much?" he repeated. The shopkeeper named a price, and Jed paid without hesitation. Then he bought thread to match and buttons and a length of lace that Miriam hadn't even looked at twice. "For your wedding dress," he said simply when she protested. "If Sarah doesn't bring something you like, you can make your own." Miriam felt her throat tighten. "You think of everything." "I think of you," he corrected. "That's all." They drove home as the afternoon stretched long and golden. Miriam leaned against Jed's shoulder, feeling the wagon sway beneath them, feeling the solid warmth of him beside her. When they crested the last hill and the shop came into view, their shop, their home, she felt something settle in her chest that had been restless for as long as she could remember. Peace. That evening after dinner, Miriam wheeled herself to the porch and stared at the hill that rose behind the shop. She'd looked at it 1,000 times from the workshop window, had wondered idly what lay beyond it, but had never considered actually going there. It was steep, rocky, covered in loose gravel that would make the climb treacherous even for someone who could walk. But she had wheels now, and wheels could go anywhere if you were stubborn enough. Jed found her there, following her gaze. "What are you thinking?" "I want to climb that hill." He looked at her, then at the slope, then back at her. "Miriam, that terrain is rough. It'd be hard even for—" Even for someone who can walk, she finished. Maybe, but I want to try anyway. Why? She considered the question. Because it's there, because I can, because a year ago I couldn't even sit up on my own, and now I want to see what the world looks like from the top of that hill. She looked up at him. Tell me I can't, and I'll do it anyway. Tell me I can, and I'll do it with your blessing. Jed was quiet for a long moment. Then he crouched beside her chair. You can do anything you set your mind to, Miriam Dayne. I learned that the day I met you, but... He held up a hand before she could interrupt. But let me go with you, not to push or help unless you ask, just to be there in case something goes wrong. Deal, she said immediately. They set out the next morning early before the sun climbed high enough to make the desert unbearable. Miriam positioned her wheelchair at the base of the hill and stared up at the slope. It looked steeper from here, more impossible. Good, she thought. I'm tired of easy. She gripped the hand rims and pushed. The wheels bit into the gravel, found purchase, rolled forward. 6 inches, a foot, 2 feet. Then the incline increased and progress slowed. Miriam pushed harder, feeling her arms burn, her shoulders scream in protest. Sweat broke out across her forehead. The chair started to slip backward. You want help? Jed asked from beside her. No. The word came out through gritted teeth. She adjusted her angle, pushed again with everything she had. The chair inched forward, then stopped, then rolled back. Miriam screamed in frustration, raw and primal and furious at her own limitations. Try zigzagging, Jed suggested calmly, like switchbacks on a mountain trail. Makes the climb longer, but the grade's easier. She wanted to snap at him, wanted to prove she could do it the direct way, but pride was a luxury she couldn't afford right now. So she angled the chair to the left and pushed. The grade was gentler here, more manageable. She made 10 feet before stopping to catch her breath, then pushed again. Another 10 feet. Then she switched back to the right, zigzagging up the slope the way Jed had suggested. It was slow, brutal. Her hands were bleeding before she was halfway up the gravel, tearing through calluses she'd thought were thick enough to handle anything. Her arms shook with exhaustion. Her breath came in ragged gasps, but she kept going. Jed followed silently, never offering help, never suggesting she quit. Just present the way he'd always been, steady and solid, and trusting her to know her own limits. When Miriam reached the 3/4 mark, her arms gave out. She sagged forward in the chair, gasping, unable to push another inch. Break time, Jed asked. She nodded, not trusting her voice. He sat on a nearby rock and pulled out a canteen, offering it to her. She drank deeply, feeling the water soothe her parched throat. Then she looked up at the summit, so close now, maybe 30 feet away. I can make it, she said. I know you can. She gripped the rims again, ignoring the pain in her torn palms, and pushed. The chair rolled forward, stopped, rolled again. Each foot was a battle, each inch a victory. But slowly, impossibly, the summit grew closer, 20 feet, 15, 10, and then with one final desperate push, Miriam crested the hill. The world opened up before her. She'd expected desert, more of the same landscape she'd seen every day for a year. But from up here, the view stretched endlessly in all directions. Mountains in the distance, purple and hazy. The town far below, small and insignificant. The ribbon of road they'd traveled yesterday. And beyond it all, more desert than she could comprehend, rolling away toward horizons she'd never reach, but could now imagine. Jed topped the rise behind her and stood silent, letting her take it in. I didn't think I could, Miriam whispered. I did. She looked at him, this man who'd saved her life and then taught her to live it. You always believe in me, even when I don't believe in myself. That's what love is, Jed said simply. He moved to stand beside her chair, his hand resting on her shoulder, seeing someone's potential, even when they can't, holding space for them to become who they're meant to be. Miriam reached up and covered his hand with her own bloody, battered one. I couldn't have done this without you. Yes, you could have. His voice was firm. You have everything you need inside you. I just gave you the tools to access it. They stood together on that hilltop for a long time, watching the world breathe beneath them. And Miriam understood something fundamental. She hadn't climbed this hill to prove anything to anyone else. She'd climbed it to prove it to herself that paralyzed legs didn't mean a paralyzed life. That limitation was often just perspective, that the only real disability was giving up. Saturday came wrapped in perfect weather, clear skies, gentle breeze, temperature just cool enough to be comfortable. Sarah Jenkins arrived that morning with 3 dresses to choose from, all simple but beautiful. Miriam selected a cream-colored cotton with lace at the collar and sleeves, modest, practical, and somehow exactly right. Sarah helped her into it, then braided her hair and wove in wildflowers she'd picked on the way over. "You look beautiful," Sarah said softly. Miriam studied herself in the mirror. She didn't look like a bride from the magazines she'd read as a girl. No elaborate gown, no veil, no delicate slippers, since her feet wouldn't be seen anyway, but she looked like herself. Strong, capable, loved. "Thank you," she said to Sarah, "for this, for being here." "And it's an honor," Sarah replied, and Miriam could see she meant it. They traveled to town in the wagon, Jed in his best shirt and clean pants, Miriam in her new dress, Sarah beside them, chattering nervously about flower arrangements and whether they'd remembered to bring the marriage license. The blacksmith met them at the courthouse as promised, standing witness, along with Sarah and looking uncomfortable in formal clothes. Judge Morrison performed the ceremony on the courthouse steps, simple and brief. Miriam barely heard the words. She was too focused on Ed's face, on the way he looked at her, like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. "Do you, Jedediah Hartley, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "And do you, Miriam Dayne, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." Her voice was steady and sure. "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Arizona, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Jed leaned down and kissed her, gentle and reverent and full of promise. When they pulled apart, Sarah was crying, the blacksmith was grinning, and a small crowd had gathered to watch. Let them watch, Miriam thought. Let them see that the woman they left to die is now someone's wife. The ride home as Mr. and Mrs. Hartley felt different, somehow charged with new meaning, even though nothing had fundamentally changed. They were still the same people who'd left that morning, but the silver rings on their fingers made it official, made it real in a way that mattered to the world beyond their workshop. That evening they sat together on the porch, their usual spot, their usual chairs. But Jed had brought out a bottle of whiskey he'd been saving, and they toasted their marriage under a sky full of stars. "To new beginnings," Jed said. "To second chances," Miriam added. They drank, and the whiskey burned warm all the way down. "I have something to show you," Jed said, after a while. He disappeared into the workshop and returned carrying a roll of papers. He spread them on the small table between their chairs, architectural drawings detailed and precise. Miriam leaned forward, studying them in the lamplight. It was a house, not the small, simple structure they lived in now, but something larger. A real bedroom with space for a proper bed, a kitchen with a good stove and counter space, a workshop attached directly to the living quarters, and most importantly, everything designed for wheelchair access, wide doorways, gentle slopes instead of steps, counters at the right height. "When did you draw these?" she asked, awed. "Started them about a month ago. Been working on them at night after you go to sleep." He pointed to different sections. "Thought we could start building this spring. Take our time, do it right. Make this place into something we can grow old in." "Grow old," Miriam repeated softly. "I like the sound of that." "Me too." He rolled the plans back up. "And there's one more thing I added. See this room here?" He unrolled a corner to show her. "I thought maybe someday if you wanted it could be a nursery." Miriam's breath caught. They'd talked around the subject of children, never directly addressing whether it was possible or wise or even something they both wanted. But seeing it drawn in ink and paper, seeing Jed's careful notation about crib placement and window height. "You want children?" she asked. "I want whatever life we can build together," Jed said. "If that includes children, then yes. If it doesn't, I'm still the luckiest man alive because I have you." Miriam looked at the drawings, at the life Jed was offering her. A real home, a real future, the possibility of family. A year ago she'd been dying alone in the dirt, and now she sat beside her husband, planning expansions to their house and considering names for children who didn't exist yet. The universe worked in strange ways. "Let's build it," she said. "All of it. The house, the future, everything. Together, together." Months passed in productive contentment. They began construction on the new house, slowly working on it. Between furniture orders, Miriam learned to mix mortar and lay bricks, under Jed's patient instruction. Her wheelchair couldn't navigate the construction site easily, so Jed built her a rolling platform she could transfer to essentially a low, flat cart that let her move around the building area and work at ground level. Sarah Jenkins became a regular visitor, often bringing food or helping with tasks that required an extra pair of hands. Other townspeople started coming too, some out of curiosity, others out of genuine friendliness. Word had spread about the quality of work coming from Hartley's shop, and when people learned that Jed's wife was also a skilled craftsman, attitudes began to shift. Not everyone changed their minds. Some still whispered about impropriety, still looked at Miriam's wheelchair with pity or discomfort. But gradually the workshop became known not as the place where that crippled woman lived, but as the place where the Hartleys made the finest furniture in the territory. One afternoon in early autumn, nearly 2 years after Jed had found Miriam under that tent, a familiar wagon rolled into their yard. Miriam was working at her station carefully, inlaying a decorative pattern into a jewelry box lid, when she heard Jed's voice outside, sharp and angry, in a way she rarely heard. She wheeled to the door and froze. Her father stood in the yard, older and grayer than she remembered, holding his preacher's hat in his hands. Her mother stood beside him, eyes red and swollen, and behind them, looking uncomfortable, were her 2 sisters. The Dayne family had come calling. Miriam's first instinct was to wheel back inside, slam the door, refuse to see them. But something made her roll forward instead, out into the yard, where Jed stood between her and her family, like a wall. "You need to leave," Jed was saying, his voice dangerous and low. "Please," Miriam's mother said, her voice breaking. "Please, we just want to talk to her." "You lost that right when you left her to die," Jed shot back. "Jed," Miriam rolled up beside him, touched his arm. "It's all right." "It's not all right. I know." She looked up at him. "But I need to do this." He studied her face, saw the determination there, and stepped aside. But he didn't go far, and his hand never left her shoulder. Miriam looked at her family, the people who'd abandoned her, the people who'd decided she wasn't worth the trouble of caring for. Her father couldn't meet her eyes. Her mother was openly weeping. Her sisters looked sick with guilt. "Why are you here?" Miriam asked, her voice flat. "We came to apologize," her father said, "to beg your forgiveness. What we did leaving you like that, it was unforgivable, evil. I've preached about mercy and compassion my whole life, and when it mattered most, I had none." "You're right," Miriam said. "It was unforgivable." Her father flinched as if she'd struck him. "We thought you'd die quickly," her mother whispered. "Don, we thought it would be merciful. We didn't know you'd suffer for days, that the whole town would—" She broke down completely. "You didn't know because you didn't stay to find out," Miriam said. "You didn't care enough to know." "We know," her younger sister said, stepping forward. Her name was Ruth, Miriam remembered. She'd been 16 when they'd left. "We know what we did. We know we don't deserve your forgiveness, but we had to try. Had to tell you that we're sorry, that we've regretted it every day since." Miriam felt Jed's hand tighten on her shoulder, support, solidarity, love. She looked at the family who'd thrown her away and felt nothing. No rage, no grief, no desire for revenge or reconciliation. They were strangers to her now, people she used to know in another life. "I'm not going to forgive you," she said clearly. "Not because I'm holding a grudge, but because forgiveness implies you have some claim on me, some relationship that needs mending. We don't have that. You ended it when you left me under that tent." "Miriam, please," her father started, but she continued, raising her voice slightly. "I'm not going to carry hate for you either. I'm going to let you go. You're going to leave this property, go back to whatever life you've built for yourselves, and we're never going to see each other again. And I'm going to continue living my life with my husband in my home, doing work I love. That's all there is." "You don't want to know about us?" Ruth asked. "About what happened after we left?" "No," Miriam said simply. "I don't." Her mother let out a sob. Her father looked like he might argue. But then he saw Jed's expression, protective and fierce and ready to defend, and seemed to think better of it. "I understand," her father said quietly. "For what it's worth, you look well, happy. I'm glad that man that your husband found you. I'm glad you survived." "I didn't survive despite what you did," Miriam said. "I survived because of Jed, because he saw value in me when you saw none. So if you're glad I'm alive, be glad for him, not for yourself." Her family climbed back into their wagon, slowly defeated. As they prepared to leave, Miriam's mother looked back one last time. "I loved you," she said. "I still do. I just wasn't strong enough to show it when you needed me." "I know," Miriam said. And she did know, had always known. Love and strength weren't the same thing. You could love someone and still fail them completely. They watched the wagon roll away until it disappeared in the distance. Then Jed turned to Miriam, searching her face. "You all right?" he asked. Yes, she was surprised to find it was true. "I really am. You didn't have to see them, didn't have to talk to them." "I know, but I needed to see them one more time so I could let them go for good." She took his hand. "They're my past, Jed. You're my future. That's all that matters." He knelt beside her chair and pulled her into his arms. "You're the strongest person I've ever known," he murmured. "The bravest, the best. I learned from you," she said. "No." He pulled back to look at her. "You were always this person. I just gave you space to become her." Winter came again, and with it, news that made Miriam laugh with joy and terror in equal measure. She was pregnant. The doctor in town had confirmed it, shaking his head in wonder because pregnancies in paralyzed women were rare, complicated, potentially dangerous. "I won't lie to you, Mrs. Hartley," he'd said. "This will be difficult. You'll need constant care, close monitoring. There are risks, serious ones." "I understand," Miriam had said, "but I'm doing it anyway." Jed had been terrified at first, worried about losing her the way he'd lost Mary and Elizabeth. But Miriam was determined, and eventually his fear transformed into fierce protectiveness. He modified the new house plans to accommodate a pregnant woman in a wheelchair. He read every medical text he could find. He drove to town weekly for supplies and advice. And Miriam continued to work right up until the day her water broke while she was sanding a table leg. The labor was long and brutal. Sarah stayed with them, helping however she could. The doctor came and went, looking increasingly worried, but Miriam, stubborn and strong, refused to give up. "You can do this," Jed kept saying, gripping her hand so tightly she thought the bones might crack. "You've climbed mountains, Miriam. You can do this." And finally, just before dawn, she did. The baby's cry split the air, healthy, strong, furious at being born. The doctor cleaned and wrapped the child, then placed the tiny bundle in Miriam's arms. "A daughter," he said, smiling. "Congratulations." Miriam looked down at the small, perfect face and felt something crack open in her chest. This child, her child born from a body people said was broken, born from love, people said was impossible, was proof that limitations were often just lies we told ourselves. "What should we name her?" Jed asked, his voice thick with emotion. Miriam thought of the hill she'd climbed, of the view, from the top of all the impossible things she'd done, because someone had believed she could. "Hope," she said. "Her name is Hope." The years that followed were full of work and love and the endless needs of a growing child. Hope learned to crawl and then walk in a house where her mother used wheels, learned that different didn't mean less, learned to measure and sand and appreciate the grain of good wood before she could read. The new house was completed when Hope was 3. It was everything the drawings had promised: spacious, accessible, beautiful. And as they carried in the last piece of furniture, a rocking chair Miriam had built specifically for the new living room, she paused in the doorway and looked back at their journey, from a tent in the dirt to a home full of life, from dying alone to living surrounded by love, from worthless to irreplaceable. Jed appeared beside her, Hope on his shoulders, both of them smiling. "Ready to go in?" he asked. "More than ready." They crossed the threshold together, husband, wife, daughter, and Miriam knew with absolute certainty that this was what triumph looked like. Not perfection, not the absence of struggle, but the presence of love, the commitment to keep building even when everything seemed impossible, the courage to believe that broken things could be made whole again. That evening, after Hope was asleep and the house was quiet, Miriam and Jed sat on their new porch, watching stars emerge one by one. "Do you ever think about that day?" Miriam asked. "The day you found me." "Every day," Jed admitted. "I think about how close I came to riding past, how I almost didn't stop." "But you did stop." "I did." He took her hand. "Best decision I ever made." Miriam looked at the home they'd built, at the workshop where they created beauty, at the life they'd constructed from nothing but determination and love. She thought about the woman who'd lain dying under a tent, convinced she had nothing left to offer the world. And she thought about the woman she'd become: carpenter, wife, mother, survivor. "You didn't save me, Jed," she said softly. "You stood beside me while I saved myself." He smiled, that rare, beautiful smile she'd fallen in love with. "Then we saved each other. And under a sky full of stars, in a house built by their own hands, surrounded by everything they'd fought to create." Miriam Dayne Hartley knew the truth. Real strength wasn't in walking or running or standing tall. Real strength was in refusing to stay down when the world said you belonged on the ground. She'd earned every inch of the life she lived, every moment of the love she felt, every breath of the freedom she'd fought for. And nobody, not her family, not the town, not fate itself, could ever take that away from her.